comments of strangers can impact your plans, or what culture, structures, and values may oppress, marginalize, alienate, create, or enhance privilege and power in relation to a social work client. So it's very ambiguous for a reason. Like, it uses the big words. I took it straight from the syllabus. And an example you could give is this redlining. So I kind of want to show you guys this. This is how prejudice still can affect us today, even though this was set in place 100 years ago. So showing you guys this, have you ever heard of redlining? All right, good. Then you get to learn something new today if you pay attention. Get ready. We're only like a minute early, so there's a few of these, but redlining is kind of one of the structures of dominance that have existed in America for a good 100 years. You'll find this in every city. So whatever city you guys are from, it's usually in the bigger cities. Let's just start it because we are at about 50 seconds till class starts. This is one of the racist things. So one of the dominant structures that still go on to this day. So they did this research in 2019. But you ever notice like different parts of town have like a bad part of town and then you got the good part of town? So basically this is how it all is explained and why it was started in like 1910. So this is 25 years after Emancipation Proclamation, but there's still
a new survey finds Minneapolis and St. Paul among the worst places for Black Americans to call. The racial inequity in this state is horrific.
We think about wealth inequality in the United States today. That's directly attributable to problems associated with housing, denial of housing, the inability of African Americans to acquire wealth in the same.
Yes.
So our faith is basically explaining why like the richer areas is so different from the
You can use this as an example, but any way that you still see racism or oppression today or things that are injustice. And it doesn't have to be as simple as like a redneck yelling at his stores outside. It could be the banking system that they won't give adequate loans for housing to minorities. And that's what this is about. So this is one example. You'll probably find hundreds of examples.
So we can pick any example.
Right. And it helps to have like some article, like we've searched Google Scholar, but there's tons of articles about how oppression still occurs. And poverty and money oppression is like one of the biggest things, like there's still some research that says women only make 70%. You're annoying her, I think.
I read about like how a lot of people, they're trying to get like the Black people in homes, like the older ones. Like white people are trying to buy them and then like Black people are trying to go into the newer homes, but in reality they're kind of treating them at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of good examples. Are you guys all taking your what your next classes are for next semester?
And the other
Do you? What's that?
And the other social work happened.
What'd you say? I'm sorry.
The other one we got to take is like another social work class.
There is a lot, yeah. If you're a social work major. Are you a social work major?
Yeah.
So there's 48 hours of social work you'll take total. That would be, what is 48 divided by 3? Anyone good at math? 48 divided by 3? I'm not that good at math. I think it's like 13. What's that? 16. So there's 16 social work classes required. And then like, what elective are you guys? Or what major are you guys?
Social work.
Social work. So there's at least 16 social work classes. And you'll learn more about this stuff. You need at least a 2.0 to graduate. So that means 2.0 in everything. But then in social work, you actually need about I'm pretty sure. Has anybody ever explained the GPA stuff you got? Like you go on probation if you're at 1.9. So it's not the end. What's that? After the fall, right? So I'll start this over because it is after 1, but this is one example of oppression and racism. Did you ask a question? I'm sorry. So does redlining seem to make a little more sense with this? Just quick intro, but this is like kind of how oppression still happens in the banking system, and it can affect where you live and how you buy a house. And it's only 6 minutes, so give me 6 minutes if you can. I know it's hard to pay attention, so give me 6 minutes.
A new survey finds Minneapolis and St. Paul among the worst places for Black Americans to call home. The racial inequity in this state is horrific.
You think about wealth inequality in the United States today, that's directly attributable to problems associated with housing and denial of housing. The inability of African Americans to acquire wealth in the same way that other groups were able to, by virtue of having access to affordable housing, is one of the problems that impact those communities of color today.
About 75% of white families own the homes that they occupy. About 25% of Black families own the homes that they occupy. It's actually the largest, in terms of percentage, gap in the country.
So a lot of this stuff started 100 years ago, but because it was started, it's hard to undo it. So that's what this research is about, and kind of the bad areas of town that you see. And this is a good example you can use for the 2-page paper that's due next week.
A major impediment to civil rights for African Americans, economic opportunity, these racially restrictive covenants, private contracts between individuals that allow them to dictate to whom they'll sell their property.
So if you drive around big cities, you'll sometimes see this. Like there's the good part of town, there's the sketchy part of town, there's the real bad part of town, here's another good part. So they're kind of split up, and this explains how they did that and how it was started.
Covenants exist across the country in Minneapolis. The covenants were first put in 1910. At that point, developers could start buying up large sections of farmland that is filling the city.
And when they start selling off the individual lots, that's really when the racial covenants kind of injected into the property record.
Racial covenants tells you who can or cannot live, lease, even occupy certain spaces. 100% of these covenants are aimed at African Americans.
So what this is called is redlining, and then they'll describe why they call this redlining, because it was the red part of town on the map. And this was legal 100 years ago. It became illegal in the mid-20th century.
The FHA, they made color-coded maps of all the largest cities in the United States, and they broke cities down into 4 different areas. Red is considered hazardous, that's the worst. Yellow is considered definitely declining. Blue is considered still desirable, and green is considered the best. So areas that were predominantly African American or majority minority, but really in a lot of cases, even if there's a few non-white people there, that's often enough to be redlined. The FHA refused to give an area a green line designation. Again, this is the best designation that they'll offer unless, and I'm quoting again, restrictive covenants are already in place. That line is from the FHA underwriting manual.
In a lot of ways, the practice of redlining, which didn't start until the 1930s, institutionalized and spread racial covenants all over the country, because suddenly members got sanctioned after action from the federal government saying this is best practices.
Our community was redlined. Simple as that. Now, as a community, we made the best of it, and we produced a great many influential people as well. And a lot of that came from having,
So all those people actually grew up in Minnesota, including Prince, if you guys remember him. I know he's dead now, but he is pretty famous.
developed a pretty powerful community.
So it's now illegal, but if those seeds are planted in these communities, like if you remember going to your grandparents' house growing up or somebody else's, like they lived there for a long time. They're not just going to move now that the law has changed, and it makes it hard to sell a house that's say 50 to 100,000 and then go buy a house that's now 200,000 in a different area. So that's what the research here is showing.
Fourth Avenue was now referred to as Crack Avenue. Up and down Fourth Avenue throughout the neighborhood, there were tough times.
This very persistent myth that northern cities never had formal segregation. The South had Jim Crow, and look at those signs. Well, racial covenants did the work of Jim Crow in the North, all over the North.
So, covenants are now illegal, kind of this, yawning chasm of wealth inequality that emerged as a result of covenants is still very much with us today.
I want to show the area though with the highway, because in Cincinnati, one other thing they did was in the 60s, they ran I-71 through different neighborhoods, and try to guess which neighborhoods that they picked to run the interstate through. If you were picking one that, because it would divide the, areas. If you kind of cut the highway through it, we didn't have a lot of interstates till like the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. So 71 came into Cincinnati and like Evanston and some of the areas that were considered redlined.
This is still very much with us today. Identifying racial covenants, however, has proved remarkably challenging. The only way to find racial covenants are to read warranty deeds. We're looking at about 3 million deeds and have been between 1900 and 1960.
So a lot of
deed on average runs about 3 pages. So we're in the ballpark of 10 million or so pages of text.
So these guys' research is looking at the deeds that were created between like 1910 and 1939 that put these covenants in the deeds, like the property, who owned the property, and how that plays out today. And it does cause some challenges.
So what we're doing with Mapping Prejudice is we're using digital tools to help us identify the deeds that do contain racially restrictive covenants. We ask volunteers to help us transcribe them. And those answers I then export, and this actually gives me enough data to build the map. There are actually two categories. It's business industrial and undeveloped.
With this data set that the Mapping Prejudice team has built, we asked the question, how have racial covenants affected present day socioeconomic outcomes?
And the results that we find are that covenants were a way to lift the house prices by keeping people of certain races and colors out. What we find is a causal link between covenants in the past and 3 present day socioeconomic outcomes. We find that houses that were covenanted in the past have, on average, 15% higher house values today compared to houses that were not covenanted. We also find that covenanted.
So if your house is worth 15% more and say the average house is 200,000, how much money are you missing out on? Those who are good at math. So average home today is $200,000. The houses that were redlined are worth 15% less on average. It's about $30,000. So it's, for your overall wealth, like the house you purchase is one of the biggest purchases you'll ever make in your life if you buy one, or rent is the most you'll put towards something in your life. So it does change the economic divide quite a bit.
areas have lower African American residents and lower African American home ownership rates compared to areas within Minneapolis that do not have covenants.
I think you can make very powerful arguments about how can we reframe contemporary policy through more of an equity lens to help mitigate some of this damage that's resulted from racial covenants.
And I want everyone with this map to imagine themselves in this landscape of privilege and disenfranchisement.
So that's one of the examples you could use for your paper coming up. Like I said, it doesn't have to be a blatant example of prejudice or discrimination. It could be something that you can't really see. And lending in a bank really does affect your life. Like, it's hard to get a nice car without a good loan. If you got a loan at 5% interest, or a lot of times used car loans are 10% interest, it's a big difference in your car payment overall. Like, that could bring your car payment from $500 to $700 a month. So it can price you out of different cars. If you get interest rate on your house, right now they're like 3%, but if you got it at instead, say 5 or 6%, that's double, and you're paying it over 30 years. So if the interest rate is double for 30 years, you end up paying about double the price for the house over the lifetime of the house. So it's some of the things to consider, and how, again, like I said, how culture, structures, and values may oppress, marginalize, alienate, create, or enhance privilege and power in relation to a social work client. So it's one of the things that's hard to explain, but another good example I always use is that the price of gas. Anybody know how much you pay for gas in like other countries? Because it's expensive here now.
How much is this?
Here, do you do it by the liter or by the gallon? Right. So we only pay like $3.50 per gallon, but we'd be like, dang, that's expensive, because we were used to half of that last year. So per liter, it's less than $1 per liter. What is Russia's?
I guess it's more expensive.
In
Otherwise,
Russia?
we have like our fuel that we export it, so and
Right. So we have a major fuel subsidy and electricity subsidy because we do consume a lot of it. So hopefully that answers your question on like the paper. It's just a 2-pager, but that's like one example. You could pick some of many examples. We went into Google Scholar and did a search on redlining in all the research that's done since 2017, also since 2020. So there's some good stuff coming up. A legacy of redlining and join gang neighborhoods in Los Angeles. So that's another journal article. Some people have been doing research on this area, and if it was a redline neighborhood, it is something that could have come up. And that's essentially some of the challenges that come from it. So we are dipping into chapter 13, believe it or not. So we're kind of a week ahead of one chapter per week, but it's social work and families and youth. And that's partly where the housing topic came up with, besides the fact that like your next paper is about oppression and discrimination and things of that nature. It really, housing prices nowadays make it really hard for people to survive. I don't know if any of you guys have seen it. We were looking up something that was close by in Xenia. It is actually going for, I hate when it does that, about $200,000. But overall, the house is not the best looking, you know what I mean? Like, it's a $200,000 house, so you pay $1,000 a month to live in this place. It's right up the road, because we were kind of looking around here. I'm like, what are housing costs around here? So this one is, here's Wilberforce, and then here's where the house is. It will cost you $1,000 a month to buy this thing. It actually does look better on the inside than it does on the outside. So it's a little bit rougher out there. They're missing a few things. What's it?
I see why they took a picture of stuff.
Exactly. Like if you were a good realtor, you would almost know to be like, at least Photoshop it, right? So they did okay on the inside, but there still was a bunch of crap. So it looks like they rehabbed it, and it's updated. So, but again, it's $1,000 a month. I think it's 4 bedrooms. Here's where I think I saw we had the ladder in the shop vac, and then the fan coming up. Not here, but I think it was here. I'm like, oh. I didn't think they had air conditioning, so I was like, let's see here. So then you see the window unit, so they definitely don't have air conditioning. And so it's about $1,000 a month to live into this place. Now get ready for the backyard. You got to brace yourself. There you go. There's your backyard. See that swimming pool? Anybody want to go swimming? I don't know. I'm trying to get a reaction from my wife. As I said, we should buy this house because it's about the exact same price and size as ours in Cincinnati. And I don't think she's going to go for it. But yeah, they could really use a weed whipper, just like something that's like zzz. But again, like that's $1,000 a month. It's a making it hard for people to rent in general. So even if you go to like the surrounding areas of Xenia, because I was trying to look at what all the houses are like. Well, that one's 12,000, but I think it's just land. So just like different places to live, it still seems like the average price is $235,000. 4 bedrooms, 2 baths. This one's 180, so that's still about $900 a month. Well, it says $761. No, I'm sorry, $945 a month. So housing, it prices a lot of people out. And this is assuring that you would get a loan. And to get the loan, you got to get pre-qualified. So if you go on Zillow, you can find ways to get a housing loan. And overall, that affects our families and youth, like children and families. And it's challenging because it could pick the neighborhoods that you live in. It could pick the places that you struggle with. There was a brief clip on families and youth, so I wanted to show you guys that because I know some of you wanted to do social work with.
In an ideal world, every family would be stable and supportive and every child's needs would be met. But in reality, families who live in poverty with mental illness, chemical abuse, or other issues may need the help of child, family, and school social workers to find their way. An important role of these social workers is to help clients understand the services available to them and the organizations and programs that will help them and teach them how to advocate for themselves in the future. Good record keeping of conversations and activity is critical. Child and family social workers protect vulnerable children and help families function more effectively. They often connect families with housing, childcare, and welfare assistance. They may promote better parenting skills, coordinate adoptions, and find foster homes for abandoned or abused children. School social workers deal with problems like bullying, truancy, and teenage pregnancy, and they may also advise teachers. Some travel to multiple schools in a school district. Child, family, and school social workers work for government agencies, nonprofits, school systems, and in residential facilities. A bachelor's degree in social work is the most common requirement to enter the field, though many also earn a master's in social work. While the work can be emotionally taxing, child, family, and school social workers help lighten the load for struggling children and families and give them hope for a brighter future.
So that's kind of some of the child and family social workers. Who here wanted to do children and family social work? Because I know there's a few who mentioned school social work. Some who wanted to do children and families. It's definitely a tough job. Did you want to do some? Which neighborhood were you in? Like what part of the country? Like, where are you from?
Cleveland.
Cleveland. Okay. So here's some of the families. It mentioned single parent families, so that's at least 50% of the families nowadays, because our divorce rate is at about 50%. Second marriages, divorce rates like 60 or 70%, and third marriages, divorce rates like 75%. So you get blended families where people have kids at different times and come together. Gay and lesbian families. Gay marriage was legalized in 2015. You have multi-generational families and also grandparent-headed families. So the grandparent-headed families are more often than you think. That's some of the research we've all been doing, and it's definitely something that has come up more and has been harder. In the past, like, grandparents were retired and didn't work, so it was easier for them to raise grandkids and watch them while mom and dad's at work. Because of the economic crisis, it seems that we have, more challenges that grandparents have to work into their 60s, 70s, and 80s because they can't afford it. And then watching grandkids on top of that sometimes. So some of the family services offered are counseling for families, individuals, and groups, family life and education, and financial assistance. So there is the video I promised you on interventions, and I want to make sure that I...
People with ADHD.
I know we've watched one before, but I want to get the intervention video and make sure that I've
What does it mean?
gotten the right one. This is it. Actually. Anybody seen some of the toll that like the opioid epidemic has had on a lot of families in America? And this is usually done with the whole entire family, and you have like one shot with some of the families that when they go in for intervening. They have now 21 seasons of this, but I promised you an addictions intervention video, and this is another one.
29. I was successful. I was someone. Thanks for the ride. I will talk to you after. All right. Stay safe.
She was sporty. She was great with her kids. Now that drugs has taken over her life, she's none of that anymore.
I am addicted to heroin.
She went from working in a great family life and her 3 children to living on the streets.
She's prostituting to get her heroin.
You're looking for dates? Yeah?
I don't feel like she's my daughter. It feels like drugs is controlling her life.
Hey, Johnny.
Oh, what did you do to your hair? It's like purple. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good.
Hi, Dad.
Hi.
How are you?
Want to go get a coffee or something, or do you want to just sit here? Yeah, let's go get a coffee.
We're having a thing on Saturday.
Yeah?
So you want to have like a dinner at my place and have a Chinese order and like,
Yeah. Well, do you guys want to give me like 10 minutes and then come and talk with you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll just walk in.
I'll be right back. Just my dad and their sister. They're
Surprise! Oh, hey, guys.
Yeah, they see them. I was like, you guys gotta wait a second. I was like, I need to go do something back here. Can you give me a little bit more time? I'm gonna make money right away. I'll give you. I'll even show you. I've got a date. Hey. Hi. I'm coming over.
Joanne called and she said you was gonna go over to the house here.
Hey.
I was happy. Joanne showed up at my house. I mean, the world to me.
I'm gonna go get a nap.
Oh.
Makes you wonder how they film inside the bathroom too. Like, how do they get consent to just watch them shoot up?
I'm just sweating balls here. Here she comes. Okay, it's hot. It is hot. Where's Dad? Hey, Ilya. Waiting for his dinner.
Come sit here, Slan.
Hmm?
Let's go over here.
Mm.
All right, Sammy.
Sammy.
Haven't called that for a long time, right? Hammy bear.
Oh, I haven't heard that for a long time. Hammy bear. I know they smell good. It tastes really good. At the dinner table you got here, Dad? A restaurant. And some crepes. It's good. Desserts. Not desserts, that's the right word. Steak wrap was great. I don't know. And everything was falling out.
Right.
I'm really sweating here. Hey, you know you left all your stuff in the bathroom, right? Did I? Yeah. Where is it? On the counter and on the. I just left it laying there. How did I just leave it? Did I put it back in my purse? Oh.
So she might be
All
high.
this stuff over here. Okay, I gotta go. Okay. Super. You're gonna. Is it? It's okay. Yeah, don't be too upset. I am. Really hard to speak like this.
I've heard so many stories about drugs do to you. You know, and I've not seen it firsthand. I want to get my daughter back.
Hi, I'm Maureen,
Hi, Maureen.
and this is your intervention.
Well,
So with family counseling, oftentimes, especially drug and alcohol, you have one shot, and they could say, "There's no way in hell I'm going to rehab." And they often encourage the families to then kick them out, make them homeless, not let them come back and eat crepes for dinner or shoot up in their bathroom. So usually that helps to get people to say yes, but sometimes you'll see them say no.
it's okay, John.
First thing I do is check the news to make sure you're not one of the people that died from an overdose overnight in Kamloops. I'm here because I love you and don't want to lose you. When you came to dinner on Saturday, I didn't know how bad your addiction was. It broke my heart to see you like you were. I cannot make up for yesterday, but I can make up for the future. I'm sorry, Lynn.
So it's my job today, Shalane, to ask you whether or not you're ready to accept help for your addictions.
You're ready.
Are you ready?
Oh, yes. I'm more than ready.
You're more than
I'm more than ready.
Thank you.
Good for saying yeah. Ready?
Sure am. Welcome to the Firm Recovery Center. Hi.
So the first few months is definitely hard for folks. I often suggest doing inpatient to detox. Heroin is one of the drugs you actually don't die from detoxing, but you feel like you're going to die. Alcohol is one of the main ones that you do die from detoxing. You can die from detoxing off alcohol, but you can't die detoxing off heroin.
I took off these foggy glasses and I could see again, and I don't think I realized the beautiful world I lived in. I took it all for granted. I wake up and I'm happy and I'm joyful and I feel good and I don't need substances.
When Shalane arrived, she was quite desperate to have a different way of life. She lost connection with who she was, but I think she got reconnected with the real Shalane.
This journey is just beginning.
So she may be 5 years sober now. A lot of these, as you can see, they're through Annie, but you can watch some of
National University sent me on
the interventions, and this is what it would look like for family services. So again, counseling for families, often they would recommend the family to go to Al-Anon family groups, counseling for individuals, and sometimes there's group counseling. You'll have family life education, so like getting them educated on some of the stuff that, if it's an addiction, like what the addict may do. Occasionally financial assistance or employee assistance, and then as social workers, we believe in advocacy. Some of the family-centered services, and we'll have more stuff on this Thursday, but presenting issues, domestic violence, poverty, and that was one that we were going over with the housing thing that's been a little bit tough lately. Addiction can encompass all of these, so occasionally you'll see addictions that will include poverty, domestic violence, family structures, stress, and then communication patterns. So addiction is all encompassing, and they say about 25% of folks have at least been either alcoholic or addicted to something themselves, or had a family member that had alcoholism or addiction. Some of the child maltreatment ones, from the historical perspective, we would just try to make sure that child was safe. The legal definition of it used to just cover like physical abuse and even some psychological abuse, but now there's a lot that include where there's neglect and there isn't enough food in the house, and that's when you'll have social workers that visit and see if the kid is safe. There's lots of types of child abuse and neglect. And the incidence of child maltreatment, some mentioned during the pandemic, it went up quite a bit. I know this is an older PowerPoint, doesn't include the pandemic, but because schools were closed and there was more stress in the home and everyone living together again, there was higher incidence of child maltreatment. So the contributing factors being stress, the overall psychological effects, and I go over at least a little bit about trauma in every class, but the ACEs is something that is really focused on nowadays in social work, the trauma videos of ACEs. And that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So there's quite a few. In our HBSE class, we watched this woman named Dr. Nadine Burke. I'd recommend, especially if you're writing any papers for psychology on TED Talks, watching about Dr. Nadine Burke's. There's a quick overview here on ACEs, though, which is Adverse Childhood Experiences. Most people have one.
What would you do if you knew there was a way to help protect your family from future health problems, such as diabetes, high blood pressure, even alcoholism, drug abuse, and depression? The future sounds so far away, but to your children, every minute in their growing brain counts toward a healthier, more successful life. That's because positive experiences and environments help build stronger foundations for developing healthier brains. And healthier brains lead to greater emotional well-being, greater success in school, and brighter futures. Negative experiences like living in a house with verbal or physical abuse, sick or divorced parents, or emotional neglect create toxic stress that can hinder your child's brain development and lead to those unhealthy outcomes in the future we talked about. We've all heard of stress, but what makes stress toxic? When the weight from all those adverse childhood experiences we mentioned builds up, it can become too much to bear and affect how children look at the world. We call those experiences ACEs for short. Leaves you wondering why you've probably never heard of ACEs before. ACEs are common, but talking about them isn't. In fact, 2 out of 3 patients surveyed have at least one ACE, but they may not know how that ACE score is affecting them or their family. That's because a person with a high ACE score doesn't win. As the number of ACEs increases, so does the risk for negative health outcomes.
They say at least 2/3 of us have one adverse childhood experiences. And again, it's treatable with therapy and whatnot. If there's as many as 3 or 4 ACEs, they say the likelihood of having more challenges in the future and growing up are way more likely. So it's important to get therapy if there is more ACEs.
A score of 5 or more on the ACE survey raises the chance of developing severe health concerns in adulthood to 55%. And those with 6 or more ACEs can die an average of 20 years earlier than those with no ACEs at all. Sounds scary, but the worst part? Parents with high ACE scores are more likely to raise children with high scores too. And it can lead to behavioral issues, school failure, and physical and mental problems. But even if you have a high ACE score, there's good news. Because now you know, and now you can change the direction of your life and help others in your family. The key? Well, as we mentioned earlier, ACEs are common, but talking about them isn't. Changing the conversation can help break the cycle and change lives. To start a new conversation, first take the ACE survey online. It's 10 easy questions that'll let you know if you or your family is at risk. Usually that's a score of 4 or more. Whether you score a 1 or a 10, tell your physician. And remember, a child's brain is always changing and growing, so every positive experience you provide is like another building block on the road to a healthy brain and a healthy future. Funded by a grant from the state of Tennessee, Building Strong Brains.
So this is just one state and their outreach and things that they're doing. And obviously there are several that are doing these ACEs and the trauma-informed care. So working with folks that have had trauma and taking the online test. So there's an online ACEs test that is free. I thought it would be under this link, and it doesn't look like it is, but I'm gonna just do the search for you guys.
You know the old saying, don't judge a book by its cover? Well, the same is true when you assess a patient. Hi, I'm Dr. Cruz. Early in my career, I noticed a pattern with some of my patients. They often had multiple health issues, were uneasy during office visits, and frequently visited the emergency department. But worst of all, they never got better despite multiple visits. Then I realized something. From an early age, many of my patients were exposed to trauma and adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. This includes emotional, sexual, or physical abuse.
Well, she's listing them here, and this is the quiz that you can take that if having exposure, just being sure to check in for therapy.
Violence, neglect, discrimination, poverty, and other adverse events. ACEs are more common in the US than you'd think. In fact, 60% of US adults have one ACE, 25% have 3 or more ACEs, and 16% have 4 or more. ACEs occur in all socioeconomic groups, but are more common in low-income and minority populations. For young children, repeated exposure to trauma can impact brain development and literally rewire the brain's response to stress. So as they grow up, many struggle with issues related to emotional regulation, like depression, anxiety, or substance use disorders. Trauma survivors are also more often at risk for chronic diseases, behavioral health problems, and even suicide. Knowing all this, I began to rethink my approach to care. Instead of asking patients,
"What's wrong with you?" I ask, "What happened to you?" Recognizing that life experiences are often a root cause of poor health is integral to improving patient care. Trauma-informed care has helped me take these experiences into account, providing greater insight into my patients' needs and how to address them. Here are 5 key ways that healthcare organizations can gradually integrate trauma-informed care into their practices to help patients and staff. First, build awareness and generate buy-in. Involve both staff and patients in adopting a trauma-informed approach. Second, invest in a trauma-informed workforce. Hire staff that embrace trauma-informed care and provide training not only for clinical staff, but also for non-clinical employees like front desk workers or security guards, who are often the face of your organization. Next, create an environment that is safe and welcoming for patients and staff. Engage patients in meaningful ways. Ask how they feel and listen. You can also build trust by involving them in their own treatment planning. Finally, identify and treat trauma. Consider a screening approach that works for your patients and ensure that treatments and referral sources are available. These changes take time, but each step improves our ability to connect with and care for patients. Today, our patients appreciate the changes we've made, plus our staff is more in tune with patients, so work is less stressful and more rewarding. Trauma-informed care. It can truly transform the caregiving experience from being treaters to being healers.
So a lot of social work agencies are getting certified in trauma-informed care. We were one of them at Lighthouse Youth Services and with our refugee resettlement program, because you want to be sure to use the trauma-informed approach. The list here could be one of the many ACEs. We've even had laws enacted. So in the past several years, child welfare legislation, we had several acts, the Child Abuse and Prevention Treatment Act, the Indian Child Welfare Act, Adoption and Assistance, and Child Welfare Act, and then Child Abuse and Treatment Act amendments have all been passed in the past several years. There's a few of these actually that cover the last several years. So we also had the Omnibus Reconciliation Act and Family Preservation and Family Support Services. That funds a lot of the agencies we work at as social workers. Also, Adoption and Safe Families Act, Foster Care Independence Act, those also fund a lot of our social work jobs. So when you get a job or apply for a job in a few years when you're taking the licensure exam and getting out of here, this is where our money sources come from. Foster care, Promoting Safe and Stable Families Amendment. You can see how much there is. There's a lot of legislation. Keeping families safe. Here's the list of them from your book. But from 74 to 2008, we had really dozens of child welfare and child legislation and adoption policies pushed through. And we'll go over those more on Thursday. And this child welfare delivery system. Starting with that, primarily they try to do prevention. So even in our addiction recovery center, the number one thing we do from like preteen, 12 to 18, was prevention. So like prevention and offering leisure activities and services and things that people could get involved in other than drinking and smoking after school, like having different things that go on, and help with that family preservation, help with the daycare, and help with all of that. So I am, because we're, did anybody want to present today too? I meant to ask that before we, because remember you have the option to also film it on YouTube Live. So put that into the D2L if you don't want to present, and it's because of COVID. Otherwise, I would force you all to present in front of everybody, which can be not fun to do or learn, but as professionals, as we get into our careers, you'll eventually have to present in front of everybody. So that is all I have for today. Any questions on anything or papers? Yeah. When is the last day we present? I've been saying because of COVID, I've kept all the assignments open. So they're still open. It should be this week. So like Thursday, if you're able to go on Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody else? I did get the final exam up there too, though. So you guys should have your finals ready. You can see it. It's not due till December. That's like a month away, isn't it? You don't even have to look at it until then. It is a month away.
Like, what is our English disability?
What? It's a self-assessment. So it's like 20 questions on like examining yourself. And who am I? And what am I doing? Why am I doing it? So.
So I wouldn't have to come back because I really didn't want to come back after Thanksgiving break for my exams because there's no point.
It's online.
Okay. I'm like, it's no point.
Right. I don't know when they are, but it's online to like the 3rd or the 4th, whatever that Friday is. So.
Okay, so I'm gonna do the diversity people on the
Redline.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's called Redline.
Redlining. When they redline neighborhoods, they put some, like in Cincinnati, it would be Evanston. My little brother always buys houses in the neighborhoods because they're like $30,000 instead of $200,000. And it's been a practice of over 100 years. So it's kind of crappy and messed up. And
all right.
Yeah.
All right. I just got a question. So
Yeah.
I got a D in here, but like I turned it on myself, so I got like a B on it.
Okay.
So